So welcome to the AFT Construction Podcast. I'm Brad Levitt, and today we have a special guest with us. We have David Byler, who's president of Caribou Creek Log Homes. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. And I think
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And, you know, for those listening, we're definitely going to get into where they can find, you know, social media handles, especially Instagram, because you guys do some incredible work that's just fascinating. Before we get into that, for our listeners that are listening and don't have Instagram in front of them, explain to them what is a timber home.
So a timber home is usually a home that's constructed out of big, heavy timbers. Traditionally, it was wooden pegs and just a lot of exposed wood. So when you walk into the home, you see the big timbers and wood with timbers or logs. But a timber home is usually considered something that's framed with big timbers.
So when you talk about, David, you know, the original installs, we think about old cabin homes, old log homes, right? As you mentioned, you think Lincoln Logs as a kid, right, as we're putting those together. It's that peg system. Now, is that similar? Are you still using that same fastener? How has that evolved over the years to what you're doing now?
It has evolved a long ways. It sure has. Homes now need to be engineered, and there's a lot of things that are done differently than they used to be. However, we still do build those old homes just like they used to be built. We go back and study how they used to do it, and then we have to duplicate that. And some of those homes are absolutely incredible. It's amazing how well they knew how to do it, and we really enjoy going back and building them like they used to.
So how much time do you spend, David, when you think about now here's your company, just as a company infrastructure, do you spend time not only in R&D looking at current methods and techniques and products to build a log home or a timber home, but how often do you tour older homes around the country, old log homes that were built, just to see the creative genius and how those were built in years past?
I don't really know how much time, but I stop at a lot of them and I look at them and one of the funnest things kind of like that we did is we had a client come to us that went to Europe and studied log homes for a long time. He was over there for 6 months, came back with this big binder all full of ideas of old homes that some of them over 500 years old, and then we had to reproduce that. We did get to use chainsaws and some of that stuff, but we had made it look just like it was built back then. So yeah,
and there's still. Yeah, you do have the cheat sheet now, right? You have chainsaws, you have other equipment, whereas before they're doing it by hand, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Working out those forearms and biceps a little bit more. So when you're looking at, just a log home, how does that work when you're thinking, okay, you have a client comes to you, David, and they want to do a timber home. I would imagine you're going to have to work with a different architect, engineers, right, who understand the super product. So are you specifically working with those creative minds on the front end, to make sure that your design will work as you get into construction?
Yes, we do a lot of that ourselves here. We have our own design team, but there certainly is some architects and design people that people go to. And, we often will take a design that somebody wants and kind of convert it over into a log or timber frame home. But that is quite a bit of work to do that sometimes. Mm-hmm.
So you're doing some of that design in-house now. Are you doing the engineering in-house? Are you outsourcing that? How does that work from the consultant side?
We outsource it for the stamp, but it's pretty much all done here. We don't have an engineer's stamp for all the different states we work in, but we do outsource that. But it's usually pretty much done in-house.
And how
other than the actual stamp?
Yeah. So how's that changed? Because right now, something we're dealing with, in Arizona, it's that indoor-outdoor living. We have these large sliders. Our clients seem to want sliders that are even bigger. They open more, right? So I'm sure, windows have changed greatly. Multi-sliders have changed greatly in the past 100 years. How has that impacted now your designs where customers are looking for bigger openings and you're doing these timber log homes?
Yep, good question. Very good question. We're still doing them just like a lot of other people are, but they're often steel framed and then they're covered with logs.
I was going to ask that. So you're doing steel, right, as the lintel, or you're doing like a steel header columns, and then that's the support structure to cover these large spans, because I'd imagine the timber couldn't cover those large spans by itself. And then you're just you're essentially putting a facade around it so you don't see the steel, but that's the basis there.
That's exactly right. We have a steel moment frame or whatever it is, and then we split the log or timber in half and recess it out and glue it back together, and you can't tell it's not. You can't tell that the steel's there, but it is there.
So how do you, the craftsmanship, right? One thing that's a constant theme is the craftsman, you know, and people that can work with their hands, and really the artisan side of this. You know, how have you dealt with that labor issue, either training, knowledge, with your team?
That's been a challenge in the last year for sure, but we do have a good core group of people, and we have some people that are very passionate about what they do, love what they do. Those people are pretty easy to hang on to because they find they get to do what they enjoy doing here more than most places. You know, in the other construction world, they get to do this a couple times a year if they're fortunate. Here they get to do it every day, all day, especially when it comes to wood joinery and craftsmanship. But the challenge is still there. To find new people that want to do it and do it it's a tough one. But we're always looking for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can all use a little bit more labor, there's no doubt, especially right now. I know I have a few clients that, you know, I'm pretty much, I think, on their daily message board as I continue to get daily emails about how many people showed up on site and why don't we have enough. You know, that's something we're all dealing with and can relate to. From your side as a general contractor, though, David, I think this is important. You know, for me as a general contractor, I'm not self-performing, right? So for those listening, to explain that a little bit more, I'm a true GC based on the complexity and the jobs that we do. You know, we subcontract all of our labor. You know, I'm not self-performing framing or concrete. You know, we work with licensed companies that do that service. Now, with you at Caribou Creek, are you self-performing the entire project? Are you doing just the timber log side? How does that dynamic work?
So I would say that 90% of the time we are a subcontractor for another contractor.
Okay.
However, locally we do general the projects sometimes. That's it's not something we do all the time. Most of our homes are out of the area, but we always have one crew out there doing it. Yep.
So essentially you answer that, because I was going to ask, you're based out of Idaho, and so when you're working there at your home base, that's when you can work as the GC. It's really difficult to be the GC when you're working in other states, right? And so essentially when you're hired to work outside of state, that's when you're performing as a sub. You're coming out, you're doing, we're going to call it framing. It's not framing. It's building the timbers, putting the log house together, right? And that's the only service you're providing outside of state.
That's right. We often do the design service, and then we pre-build the structure here at our place, build the whole thing together, number it, mark it, load it on a truck, and then we take it out to their site where they have the foundation subfloor up, and then we set it back up on their foundation.
So this is interesting. I sat in a conference, years ago, and there was a company based out of England, and I'd always heard about panelization, right, where in regard to framing, so this is outside of what we're discussing here, but on a normal wood-framed house, the analogy was used that he said, do you go and buy your TV, or do you have all the TV parts shipped to your yard, and then you have someone put together a TV in your yard, right? It doesn't happen that way. And he's like, why in framing, why aren't you building everything in a plant, shipping it out, putting it together like a puzzle? Because we do that, and instead of using, 10 dumpsters, 40-yard dumpsters, we're using 1 5-gallon bucket, right, of waste. And we know every nail, every screw that goes in that house. And the question was asked, said, well, yeah, in production, if you're doing a 2,000 square foot production home, right, it makes sense. But his comment was, no, we do castles, right? Like we could do a 16,000 square foot, extremely custom home, build it together, and ship it out. So from your side, David, I mean, it sounds like you had that same mentality that if you could put this piece together in Idaho and build this, now your install, your travel expenses, per diem, everything that goes into the company is going to be much more efficient.
It is. It's expensive to get people out there to work. However, it's very efficient. We have a big building. We do most of it inside, and we often will set the SIPS panels or something on the log frame or the timber frame, and we take it to a step, I don't know, further than most people can imagine. Like the electrical boxes are all cut, the chases are all drilled, the mule tape is put in those chases, so the electrician just has to pull things through there, and that can all be done right here, a lot faster and more efficient than it can on site.
It's interesting. I mean, was that always a concept that you had imagined it to be as you got into this industry? And we'll get into your background in a little bit, David, but is this something that's evolved over time, just the way to expedite and understand, your market and your product?
It has been. I think it came from areas. A lot of our homes went into areas where labor was more expensive than it is where we're at, and we had contractors that we work for. Usually, when we start working for a contractor, we keep them forever, and they kept asking for more and more and more. I want those gables framed. I want that done. I want you to put the SIPS panels in. And at first I thought, this doesn't really make sense. They should be doing it. But the more I realized that, often they're driving an hour or two to the job site. They're paying those guys to work out in the cold. Here we're in a controlled environment, and it just makes sense. And especially in areas like Colorado and some of those areas where labor is even a bigger problem than it is here.
And I imagine what you're alluding to is a lot of these homes you're building are in rural areas or, as you mentioned, high net worth, whether it be Jackson Hole or other nice areas in the country. And so that's why you're finding a way that it becomes a little bit more cost effective and efficient for the end user and the GC itself.
Yeah, that's correct.
So now for those listening, you mentioned SIPS panels, and to explain a bit more what those are, structured insulated panels. And so when you're doing a log home or a timber home, for anyone listening, all the exterior walls are logs, right? So you think Lincoln logs, just as you're walking through this, but then the truss system, the roof, is built. Are all of your projects SIPs, which are the structural insulated panels, and then you're putting a veneer, like a wood veneer or tongue and groove, to keep that wood look?
They're not all that way, but a good portion of them are. Our systems, our roof systems, are usually structural, so that whether it's trusses, purlins, or rafters, so they are ready for something. So SIPS panels makes perfect sense, and you're right. They often want some kind of a T&G on the bottom, and not always. Sometimes it's drywall, but and there's a few of them where they will use traditional rafters on top of that structural roof system, and then insulate it and do it all later too.
Now, what about the exterior walls?
It's kind of up to the contractor.
Yeah, well, I mean, the exterior walls, right? You want to see the timber. So how are you insulating, or does it need to be insulated on the exterior walls?
Well, on a log home, it does not need to be insulated. Each log is insulated between the logs, but on a timber frame, the SIPS panels is often put on, and the between the timber bents. And then other times we actually will build a frame wall, and they call it a timber frame home. We call it a hybrid, where the roof system will all be timbers or trusses, and then there'll be a kind of a faux beam going on a conventionally framed wall to make it appear like it's a real timber frame where it's not. We see more and more of those homes going up.
And so what you're explaining there is you maybe have a more traditional framed exterior wall, and then you're putting, the veneer or the facade of, the timbers, to give it that aesthetic.
Yep, that's right.
That more rustic feel. So what are the benefits? Like when a client's reaching out saying, David, we want a log home, outside of just the natural appeal, right? The historic value, visually how it looks. What are the benefits? How do you sell them, or what is it that appeals to them?
You're talking about with the log homes?
Yeah, I'm saying for log homes.
Yeah.
Like, what are the benefits of a log home?
Well, they're very energy efficient. They're very healthy. They're sustainable. They're built with a renewable resource. So there's lots of different reasons, but I would say that most of the homes that we built, clients come to us because they wanted it. They've always wanted this log home. They dreamed of it. It has a real homey feel to it. It's not. It doesn't look modern. It kind of puts them back in time, and those are the reasons why people build them. And often often they're built lodges or on lakes or something like that. It has a good feel, family feel.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of commercial when you speak lodges or, a retreat or maybe a hotel or something? How often do you get involved in the commercial aspect?
Pretty often. About half the stuff we build is commercial. We've built some 35,000 square foot clubhouses and that type of thing. So yeah.
It's amazing. I was just going to ask, what is the biggest size? Is there a limitation if you're doing a log home to limitation of size or square footage, or is it all depend on design?
It does depend on design. We've done things over 30,000 square feet, and then we've added accents to even some bigger buildings, but that's not really the normal. 10 to 15,000 square foot lodge is more than normal in the commercial end of it.
Yeah, and you made a couple interesting points I want to touch on, David. I mean, one of the things you mentioned, there's a lot of benefits, right? When you start thinking about sustainability, it's a renewable product, energy efficient. I mean, these are valuable items. And I was meeting with the owner, and he runs a production builder, right? He's a production builder. And what he found was he's going down this road of net zero, right? He wants homes that are sustainable. They, aren't going to consume a lot of resources. They're off the grid essentially. And what he found was in all their beta testing and stuff, when the client came in, clients they are appealed to nice finishes, right? Beautiful design, right? These are things visually they can see. And so he would take them through the model. And what they found was when they were selling on energy efficiency and net zero, no one cared. Surprisingly, I mean, you'd think they would, but they didn't. But when they saw the beautiful house, the model home, and they walked through, and then kind of the sales pitch at the very end was, hey, you get this amazing house, A, B, C, D, but in addition to that, it's self-sustainable. It's energy efficient. It's net zero. It was almost the icing where they're like, okay, sign me up. And essentially that's what you're doing is that your customer base, David, they're looking at the feel and the aesthetic of, I've seen this as a kid or I've traveled and I want this log home, right? I've envisioned having a cabin for my family retreat, go to the mountains. And so that emotion is already there, which assists in your marketing and sales process. But then the topping is, hey, this is energy efficient, sustainable. So it just adds on to it.
Very well put. That's exactly right. They first kind of have to want it because it's a different kind of a look. But when they realize that, wow, I'm doing something good for the environment, it is icing on the cake. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, for those unfamiliar, I guess, with the method in construction, we've talked about this a little bit, but how difficult is it to install? When, what is that time frame? If I release you, David, payment aside, we've scheduled, okay, you're moving my house into production, right? I'm here in Phoenix. Let's just say I'm going to build this in Flagstaff up north. If I release you on a normal, 5,000 square foot cabin, what is that time frame for you to build a mock-up, build it, label it, put that puzzle together, disassemble, ship down, put us together?
So it would probably take us, to get the logs together, and we do hand peel everything. I'm not going to count that part of it, but it would probably take us 4 to 5 weeks to build it here in our shop.
So let's touch on that. So 4 to 5 weeks to build it, but
okay.
There's the resourcing, right? So as you mentioned, you have to get the lumber, peel it. So what's that duration before you even start production?
That's a minimum of 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have to decide where it's going to go. If it's going to go to Flagstaff, which I've built several of them in Flagstaff, we're going to have to make sure that the wood is super dry because it's a high dry climate. So we're not going to put the same logs in Flagstaff as we would in Seattle. And so we're going to have to make sure we get that right. There's still some choices. We'll take the logs, we'll hand peel them. We call it a skip peel. We just kind of peel the bark off. No mechanical marks. We don't allow processors or the normal logging methods that they use is very damaging to the logs. But we are handling a piece of furniture as we're building it. So then they will be air dried and then put into a kiln until they are down to where we're happy with them. Then we bring them back out and hand peel them all again. And at this point, they are only handled with straps. Nothing more is put on them. And we build a home with them, number them, mark them, cut the window openings, bevel everything for window trim and whatever that might be, and then load them on the truck in reverse order. take them out to site. The contractor there will have the foundation in, have the subfloor in. Typically, we'll bring 4 or 5 people. Contractor will be there with 1 or 2, and we will set that. And we usually say that for every 1,000 square feet of home, it takes 1 day to set that. So 5,000 square foot home, we would expect it to take about 5 days.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So what
it is incredible.
Yeah. So I mean, the back end side, or I should say the front end side, when you're thinking about, okay, the sourcing of the product, right, and going through the kiln and, you know, everything you're doing as far as the logs themselves. Yeah, there's a duration there, but once it's shipped, I mean, this is really a 1 to 10 day process for most of the homes that you're doing.
Yep. It is incredible. We've done some weekend homes, and the neighbors left for the week and came back for the next weekend, and there's this log home sitting next door.
Well, based on our current framers, not to throw them under the bus on what it's taken our durations, I mean, from, you know, a 16-week duration to a 5-day, there's a drastic difference there.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this.
Sure is.
David, you brought this point up, which I want to touch on. So when you speak about just the difference in climate zones, right, there's different climate zones in all parts of the country. You know, we're a drier climate, of course, in Phoenix and Flagstaff. So when you're comparing Flagstaff to Seattle, does it dictate the species? You know, you have experience working these different markets, so I'm sure you understand what kind of wood, you know, how dry it needs to be, or the species you're going to use. You know, how has that evolved? Do you reach out to people local? I mean, how are you updating that knowledge base to know exactly what product or what species you should be using in each territory of the country?
Okay, good question. Very good question. We prefer using Douglas fir. Find that it'll work anywhere because we can also dry that. It's very stable. However, it is a little bit more expensive, and so we do find people that want us to do it in a pine or something, and we're not really comfortable because of past experiences putting that pine home in some areas. Insects, we're just not, and so we limit some areas to some species. Douglas fir we could put anywhere. Cedar, on the other hand, is very durable. It's probably the best wood out there. It does have more character, and there's a few people that are allergic to it, but that's also a good option.
And so you're using Douglas fir most of the time. Sometimes if the client is requesting pine, it'll be dependent on where they live and if it will function and, you know, and be warranty, you know, you can warranty it.
Yeah.
So then as far as, you know, you brought up the insect side, you know, how are you treating the lumber? How are you preventing it from insect damage, termites? You know, how does that affect a timber or log home?
Well, it certainly, there is a maintenance issue there that it's not hard. It's not that we don't have to do it. It's really not that hard and difficult to keep anything out of the wood. It's a little bit hard to get them out of there if you allow them to come in. And in the southeast, we do a lot of homes in the Smoky Mountain area. There's the only place that we find that species have a bigger part of that than almost anything else. They're cedar. They don't go to cedar. They don't like it. Douglas fir is too hard for many animals like the carpenter bees and some of that stuff. So yeah, it does need to be maintained. We do if they want us to put a borate on it. But when we kiln dry the log, anything that's in there is going to be gone because it's heated up to a certain temperature and it's all gone. So it's really more keeping it maintained.
So how do you convey that to the customer? I mean, because this is really, you know, a lot of us, we're at risk all the time as builders, right? And so as you do more projects, you know, your tail gets bigger, you know, and bigger and bigger. And so the difficulty for you, yes, you know, as you're going through these 2 sessions of kiln cycles, you're killing anything that's in there, you're shipping out, it's clean. You know, but over time, if the customer's not maintaining it, which is a key aspect, there could be issues down the line. So how are you setting that precedence for someone in Alabama, someone in Washington State or Phoenix to say, hey, are there local companies you need to work with and resource to be out here treating, maintaining pest control? How does that work?
Yeah, the good question. all of the above. I will talk to local people that the Orkin man or whatever and find out what the issues may be. There is one thing to remember with solid wood logs or even timber frame. You don't have the problem that many areas have where the termites go into the walls and you don't see them. And so all of a sudden you have this infestation that goes on for a year or two before you even realize you have anything. It's very obvious if you have a problem because they are coming from the outside, drilling little holes through it, and you can see it. So in many ways, it's better than some of the wood-framed homes that where the insects go inside and just eat the studs away and they don't even realize they're there.
It's good perspective. I mean, you think about it, yeah, because in a normal framed home, you have drywall, stucco, some mixed brick, whatever on the facade. Everything's enclosed. You can't see it. Whereas log home, you may see, in our area, we get termite tubes. You may see the tubes on the wall. You have, deterioration at some point so you can identify it sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this. Right now, we've dealt with a lot of issues with material costs, right? Doug, for especially, for lumber. Lumber's up 300%. How has the current lumber craze and those prices affected your cost? Does it affect you at all even?
So if I could have every year going forward be like it was for the last 2 years, we'd be pretty fortunate because honestly, we have paid almost no more for logs this year than we did the year before or the year before that.
And why is that? How's that possible?
I don't understand. I know. I don't understand the disconnect between the cost of the wood, the raw logs, and lumber, because lumber has gone up as high as 300 or 400%, yet the raw material has not. And so it's been a good year for the log home business. I've had a custom framed, a custom contractor that does these, $1,200 a square foot type of homes, and we built him a log home occasionally. And this year he called me and said, for the first time, your log home is cheaper than I can get this thing framed. Usually we're 20 to 30% more money, and not the case this year. I'm sure that won't last, but
for now it is. So the raw material,
it is.
The logs themselves haven't had a huge change in pricing. It's interesting. No. So there's another client of mine, and he is in the residual business in the sense that he actually, when all the lumber's cut right through the yards and shipped out, the bark and the sawdust and some of these residuals of the lumber itself is what he buys for his business. And he's like, every year I've had price increases, for the residuals, and since COVID, it's all either they can't give it to me fast enough, right? It's like it's actually price decrease. It's gone down because they want it out of the plant, so they have more space for lumber that they're turning out. So I don't know if there's that side of it. I don't want to go down this road of politics, but I will say that there is a difference depending on use and demand and supply chain and everything else, which I'm sure maybe the log timbers themselves are easier for them to ship out as opposed to running the plant and COVID, spacing, who knows. But as far as the pricing itself, this is really important because you mentioned this just as a cost comparison. This year's a little different because of the cost of lumber, but typically, is there a cost difference, and what is it, between a log home as compared to a standard build?
So it's a good question, but often there's I say 20 to 30% more with a custom handcrafted log home versus a frame one with the same finishes. And that cost is almost always in the roof system. The log walls versus the frame walls, not much difference. It's when we start doing log trusses and purlins and ridges and dormers, and there's where the extra cost is.
And especially if they're doing, if you're using SIPs, they're doing some form of T&G, right? There's a lot of cost in T&G. So are you, when it comes down to the T&G and wood sealing, is that something you're also self-performing for the customer, or are they subbing that out to like a local trim carpenter?
We certainly do that, but we kind of leave that up to the contractor. contractors are our best salespeople that we have out there, so we never want to step on one's toes.
Because some of them may self-perform or have their own relationship, right?
Yeah, right. So it's just an option we leave out there, but some contractors would prefer using their own people. Yep.
Yeah, which makes sense. You know, and going back to the design when you're doing a home, and you mentioned that, hey, this on a 5,000 square foot house, essentially you could put this together once it's shipped, you know, in 5 days. Do you ever have projects where it's a partial log home? And what I mean by that, they may say, okay, we're having a 10,000 square foot home, but there's going to be multiple use. For example, here, you know, we'll have homes that are ICF, right, insulated concrete form, or block, or masonry, and wood framed or steel framed. And so sometimes you have a collaboration where there's different exterior wall finishes, right, depending on a lot of variables there for the client. So do you ever have a partial install, or do they typically say, we're doing the full log home?
No, we do that all the time. Do it all the time, more and more. Part of it is the great room is all log and timbers or something, and the rest of it is more conventional.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. I would assume that, like, especially in a cabin feel, you're going to have this large great room, kitchen, living room where you have this big vast area, and that's going to be log timber, but maybe the back end suites or bedrooms are going to be a little bit more traditional frame.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
But even with cost, but as you look at this, as you mentioned now, I mean, in the past, there's probably a rhyme or reason they did that for VE or value engineering cost, you know, but with the cost of lumber, who knows, it could essentially be a wash at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this year has been really different. It has been different, but there's some people that actually prefer the more modern look at the back end and the bedroom suites or whatever, and then have this one great room area with the fireplace, and they get what they want.
Interesting. So it's not just economies of scale or cost; it's also design aesthetic. They may have a more modern flair mixed in with the rustic of the great room and the entertaining area.
Yep.
So, and how have you dealt? Have you had a material shortage? You mentioned there hasn't been a lot of price increases. Do you ever deal with material shortages? Are you dealing with longer lead times for product?
We haven't this year. COVID hasn't really hurt us in any way that way. As far as material shortages, not really. Almost all of our material comes from a private timber companies, and they're very large, and they. Believe it or not, we buy what we call Japanese grade. So the best wood gets sorted out and gets shipped to Japan, or we get to go in there and buy it. And
so why is that?
There hasn't been a shortage.
Why is it shipped to Japan and maybe not sourced locally?
You know, I think it's because the Japanese have a little higher. We have number 1, number 2 in select, and they have. Their grades are a little bit more strenuous than ours are.
Just like they are with their steak, like an 8.5 Wagyu filet or something.
Yeah, that's about it. And we find that we don't have to worry about spiral grain and too many knots or anything. If we buy that grade, it's a little bit more expensive for us, but a small part of our I shouldn't say a small part. But 20% of the cost in a handcrafted home is the cost of material. The rest of it is labor and everything that goes with it. That's kind of a rule of thumb. It doesn't always end up that way. And so we pay more for the wood than the mills will, for sure, because we have to compete with them. But we get very, very high quality stuff. The thing that does change, though, is the lead time. Going into areas to often, if there's a road put in and they need to take a bunch of timber out, we get kind of first pick at all that timber in some of the areas where we buy, and then we also buy diseased and standing dead stuff if the fiber is still good, and we find that sorry about that. We find that buying this good wood is well worth it. So, and then they can't go in and log some of that in the summer or the spring or the fall. They have to wait for wintertime so that the ground's frozen to get into sensitive areas. So sometimes the lead time is kind of hard for people to accept, because we will need a year in some cases for some wood.
It's interesting. So for some of the wood that you're asking for, it makes sense. If you have a muddy, sloshy area, wetlands, whatever it may be, it's tough for the equipment. They get get stuck. So you have to have really hard ground for them, frozen conditions, so you get in, be accessible, get the material for your supply chain.
Yep, and we do helicopter log some stuff, and that's actually not a bad way to go, but it's
cheap.
more getting it out. No, it's not cheap. Yeah.
And are you sourcing, when you say the Japanese grade, if you will, are these suppliers that you've built relationships all, from around the U.S.? Are they local to you in Idaho? I mean, where are you sourcing your lumber?
We are sourcing it around the United States, but mostly in the Pacific Northwest. And we do have some places that we buy special wood in the southeast too. We've used cypress but mostly the Northeast.
So how have you built those relationships?
The Northwest, sorry.
Yeah. So especially in the Northwest, like how are those relationships cultivated? I'm sure over time, this has worked. Do they just take people off the street? Hey, I'm David. I'm starting a new, log home company. I need to purchase these logs from you. I mean, how are those relationships cultivated where you even have the opportunity to be purchasing, Japanese grade lumber?
That's a whole conversation in itself. That's a very, very important relationship to us. So I'll go back in time, but we had to make sure that we developed that relationship. Never been late on a payment. Pay up front and be fair. If there's a couple bad logs, and eventually we get a good relationship with these guys, and they know we're good for our money, and it works out good.
I love that you shared that. It's interesting. I mean, a while ago, probably about 6 months ago, I had Randy Coffin on, and Randy he owns a jeweler, right? He's a jewelry company here locally, and someone who's been in the industry a long time, the jewelry business, and he mentioned that he's working with suppliers. Rolex is a great example. I was asking about Rolex, the Rolex watch, and he said, for him, someone from Texas can't just call him and say, hey, I'm in town, I'll buy a Rolex watch, right? They should be working with their local distributor, because Rolex is really, they're very particular on managing, and they try to do it for price controls, and so things are being shopped and flipped and other things. And so they're really adamant on the background check for a Rolex watch. I never understood that, right, from the Rolex industry. And just the jewelry, right, as he's working with his jewelers and, sourcing diamonds and different jewels and stuff. And he said the exact same thing, that it comes down to prompt pay, doing what you say you're going to do, being a trusted ally, and really ally is the key word, right? And it's no different for you, David, when you're thinking about the construction industry. If you're paying your subs, if you're paying your vendors, if you're a trusted entity, when you need a favor or you need a product or you need a special request, they're going to be there to perform because you've already built that reputation over time for them.
Yep, it's true. It's absolutely true. Yep.
And how's that background? I mean, were you always involved in timber and log homes from day one? Were you, what experience do you have outside of that? How did this come to fruition to start Caribou Creek?
Good. So I grew up in the building industry, and then in the early 90s, late 80s, really, my two brothers and I moved to Idaho, and my older brother built his own log home because we just always dreamed of doing it. Didn't really know too much about it. Almost immediately, we had someone else that wanted one, and it was a good time. It was a very good time. Everybody wanted log homes.
When was this? Approximately?
I was hesitant.
Like time frame?
Pardon?
Yeah, time frame approximately.
It was in 1988.
Okay.
And we so we just built another one, and we all of a sudden realized that we could just shut down the rest of the type of construction we were building. We'd have the opportunity to travel over, which we all liked. Wasn't very much later, we were asked to go to New Zealand to build a fishing lodge, and of course we jumped all over that, and got to go to a couple other countries and do some stuff, and pretty much just kind of took off from there. Yep.
That's interesting. So in the late 80s, you moved to Idaho, you have a general contracting business, and then you do a log home for your brother, and then it kind of spirals into what you're doing today. How did that opportunity, especially way before social media, how did that connection happen to do something all the way in New Zealand?
It was a lot easier then than it is now, because we would run a small ad in the Log Home Living magazine, and we'd get that's where everybody went for their resource, and we would get 200 to 300 names one day after the ad would run in the magazine, and now it's social media, and to get a national presence is not as easy as the magazines were for us.
It's interesting. It's funny how these
Yeah.
things evolve, right? The newspaper industry, the power it had, right, and
Yeah.
and up through the '90s, and then you look now. Print media is now going through this revival. They're trying to figure out different ways to be a value resource, right, for their advertisers, people such as you and I that are purchasing advertising in print space. But back then, as you mentioned, there was no website, there was no internet, so the accessibility was through print, and so by you putting a print ad,
Yeah.
it opened the door.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
So how has that changed now when you think, and we'll come back to your story because I want to touch on that, but now
Yeah.
marketing, I mean, you do have a very good presence on Instagram. I mean, you're very active. How has your marketing strategies changed now here in 2021?
They seem to be evolving. Over 70% of our homes we get through referrals from past customers. But a little bit the problem with that is most of our customers don't have neighbors that want a log home. It's kind of a unique thing. I mean, we've built homes in I think 29 states, but we still do get a lot of them. And we do a couple shows, and we do have a web presence, and we locally get a lot of traffic on our web presence. People know us locally, but we're in an area where there's not a lot of people, and so the rest of it is we're always working on trying to get a little bit more presence out there, and not sure that we really know what we're doing. And Lindsay's, but we do, at least once or twice a week, someone will call us or email us and say that they saw us on the web. And
well, you're consistent. The one thing I'll say for social
Yeah.
media, it's very difficult. There's not really, with the algorithms changing and rhyme or reason, how people go viral, it's difficult. But to be consistent, have good content that people want to consume, right, it will build. And it's interesting when you talked about the referral side. So most of your customer base is referral. Now you also, especially when you're out of state, you're not the general contractor. You're working for GCs. So do you have a lot of general contractors that are repeat customers that are contacting you saying, hey, we worked with David and his team. Come down here. We got another client that wants their log home.
we have some of those. We don't have a lot of them because contractors stay in a small area, and they might have one client in 2 years that wants a log home.
Yeah.
There's very few contractors out there that's all they do is log homes. And we do have one that's all he does, and he kind of travels around. But so sometimes we go 3 or 4 years before we hear from a contractor again because he has a client that wants one, and those are the best because we know this guy, he knows us, and everything works out great.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's few and far between. And you mentioned travel. The appeal at your business is you're not having to go set up shop for 3 months or a year and a half, right? These are quick 1 week excursions to New Zealand. And so, speak about that project. That I'm sure was something you really wanted to chase because to put that as a staple in your resume and your portfolio, to market that and brand that, especially at this point in time in print media, how was that complexity building this? At that point, were you doing the same thing where you build this off-site, now you're shipping it to New Zealand and then putting it together down there?
They wanted us to use local wood, so we did. We told them that we thought we probably weren't going to get the job, but we said, listen, your wintertime is when our summertime is. You wait till our wintertime, your summertime, we'll come down and build it. It was going to be a 3-month build. And told them that's pretty much, we were very busy. And they said, go for it. And we took our wives and kids along, and they provided housing for us. So we were down there for 4 months and built it, and it was a great experience. And it wasn't super profitable, but that's not really the idea.
It's a little part-time vacation, part-time work, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So this is different than your process where in this scenario, you went down there, you used local lumber, so you didn't have all the controls you did, based in Idaho at home base. But the family came with you and you made a little excursion for 4 months down in New Zealand. How did that change the QC side, the quality controls and quality checks as far as the timbers and material you were using, and then, of course, the install and application?
Good question. After we were all finished and went back and looked at it, we would have been better off building it here and shipping it down. Since that time, we've shipped stuff into other countries. The quality control, we ended up having to buy almost twice as many logs as they thought we would need to. Even though they have premium wood down there, everything was great. It wasn't there. And honestly, the owner and us talked about it, that it would have been a little less expensive if we would have built it here, shipped it down.
It's interesting. You know, you always think, for me, this is why I always speak up about processes and how important they are, because I look back at my career and every project without fail that has gone wrong is because we deviated from that process, right? Yeah. And we have a protocol for a certain reason. We have a SOP, our operating procedures. And it's not that we're perfect. I mean, we're making mistakes. I'm sure like you are, Dave. You're still learning. You're figuring this out like I am. Construction is a tough business. Labor is a tough business. But the reality is we understand what makes us successful and what makes a project successful. And here you are now, where although that probably didn't go as planned, I'm sure you utilize that in your mental database catalog now, where when a client says, hey, David, come down to our territory, use our lumber, you're like, no, we've been through this road. It doesn't work.
Yeah. It's very good, very well put. We had a tribe over in Bellingham, Washington, that wanted us to come over and do a big project with some really large logs. I mean, one truck, one log, and they wanted us to do it on site. And I thought of New Zealand, and I thought of the process that we normally do it. It said, you know, it's not better, thinking that this is probably going to lose the job, and I wanted it, but they came around and we shipped one log, one truck over here, built the project, and it went great. And I thought, you know what? Stick with it. Yeah,
stick with it.
True.
Understand your process and be adamant that you're going to follow it. I mean, going back to New Zealand, because really what ends up happening is you lose control. And so I'm sure for you in New Zealand, just listening to you, David, is that you don't have the same quality control. You don't have the same product coming in. And so as you're putting this together and you're having to throw out lumber and throw out material and throw out logs, like you're wasting that, but it's also costing you time and money. The duration's exceeding. When we know as the longer the job goes, the less money you're going to make. And so that's where those numbers and that time frame becomes really essential and really important.
Yep.
So do you ever have contractors that like hate log homes, or maybe it's a contractor that's new to log home and they're reaching out to you to help them carry them through because, you know, they've never built a log home and they have a customer that wants it, but they want the job, they want it for their portfolio. How does that dynamic work when you're working with a first-time builder using you and your company?
There certainly is contractors that would prefer not building them. I think that we are probably the most contractor-friendly log home company out there. I do think that, and or I'm sure there's others, but there's none better. And one of our favorite contractor is one that has built with another log home company, and that doesn't take it to the level that we do. When we're finished, it's ready for him. He doesn't need a chainsaw. I mean, everything is cut, ready for him. Everything's marked out, and it is absolutely, you know, the framing is dead nuts on. So they're surprised at that. They're not expecting that. And so usually when we get a contractor, we don't lose one. He'll get us the next time. However, there is things with log homes that are different. The plumbing, the electrical, and all those things, they're just different, and more time needs to be allowed for some of that. We address all of them, and our thing is, let's make sure that their expectation is met, so that they know what to expect. And for the most part, we have happy contractors.
Well, I want to come back to the electrical side because you did bring that up earlier. I want to touch on that. Before I get there, what you explain is the ideal customer, right? When you get into marketing, you have to understand who your ideal customer is. Why are they that way? What, you know, is it an age demographic or an age spectrum? You know, is it a financial demographic? Is it a location in the country? But as you mentioned, your best projects are one where the GC is using a log home company, or they've been through that process, and now they come in and they see your refined process and your approach to the project, and it's a home run, right? And very similar, right. You know, for me on high-end custom homes, someone that's built a home, that understands the process, it's a lot easier because there's so many expectations that you have to set, that I have to set. And it's hard to remember all of them. And sometimes you get down the road, and that's the biggest disagreement there is the expectations that were either not set or we didn't meet.
Right. Yeah, meeting the expectations is so critical, and especially with a product it's new to some people, and so we really work at that one. We don't hit a home run every time with them, but we sure try.
So, David, I'm sure in this perfect world, you're working out of state. The concrete guy's the best concrete guy in the country, so you show up and the slab's perfectly level. You don't have to float anything. It's to the T. I would imagine that's never the case because we know how this goes. So how does that work from a field measure? Are you coming out and field measuring before you build in off-site? Because if you're building your template off-site and shipping it, you have to make sure those field conditions are exact to what you had. How does that work from the practicality of the concrete set and foundation the way it needs to be?
Oh, it's a good point. So first thing, we do our own shop drawings, and our shop drawings are gonna really have a center line or something that they can pull the measurements from, and they have to verify these measurements are all right and level. When we get on site, we're gonna snap a line, and we're gonna verify it ourselves. And in some cases, we fly down and field verify before we ship the log homes out. And especially bigger projects where there's multiple angles, and we just like to do it. And so we can adjust that, but it has to be the same. We have to both work off the same plan. I'll never forget the time we came out there and the foundation was 2 foot bigger than the logs were.
That's never a good thing.
No.
So that's interesting. So on your we'll just, for sake of a better word, use simplistic, but on a more simplistic build, there may be some assurance where you're giving them the shop drawings. They have their data points, their cross dimensions that they can measure and make sure they're right, and they can verify that. But on your more complicated ones, you're going to actually go out there in person, field check yourself. That way there's no room for error, right? So when you ship it, it's going to be right.
If we've never worked with the contractor and we don't really know, don't have the confidence that we should have, not to run them under the bus, but we will do that. We'll go out there and not only that, we want to make sure that we can get an 18-wheeler on site.
Yeah, because I would imagine that's logs. People don't think about just the shipping and the handling and right, just how you're going to get that and the accessibility right to each and every project, especially on a steep hillside or in the backwoods, in some nice part of the country. Yeah. It's going to be really tough for you, accessibility.
Yep. We've had to helicopter them in. We've had to use crawler cats, and all those things get kind of expensive.
That meter's always running at that point.
Yep.
So do you factor that in? So how does that work when you're bidding a job? And let's just say, okay, we're going to do this for $100,000. Do you already have an idea of the accessibility, or is this a T&M? Hey, when we get there, look, we're just going to charge time and material, to bring a crane, to bring, a cat out there to move it around, whatever it may be.
We will do the T&M if they want us to. I don't like to hear. I think sometimes the expectations aren't met with TMN. So we will usually tell them, listen, a reset's going to cost $24,000 if we can get the truck up close to the site, and if we can't, they will have to pay for whatever it takes to get the logs up close to the site. And it's very seldom been a problem. We tell them what we need to do, but to go on site is sometimes a very, very good idea. The first load of logs that comes in will be with our truck and trailer. So we kind of set the...
So you have your own driver that's bringing down that first load.
Yep. Bringing our tools, bringing our stuff down with him, and he'll deliver the first load. And... so we don't have to sit there and wait while there's 4 trucks waiting in line. Typically there's a couple trucks, and if we have to get a crawler or cat or something to pull them up in there, we'll just do it.
Yeah, that's good info. So now going back, and this is important, we talked a little bit about the insulation right in the structure itself. So when you're building these off-site, when you're thinking exterior walls, if you have plumbing or electrical outlets, right, there's still code. We have to have outlets and stuff. You're running, all the sleeving, you run all the conduit. inside of the, and then you have mule tape in there for the electrician when they come out and they can pull all their wire once it's installed?
Yeah, every area's got a little different, whatever the electrician wants there, but we'll drill the chases through there, put the mule tape in as we're building it up. As it's going up, each course goes up, we fasten the logs down, run the mule tape through, and when it's all done, he just hooks onto it and pulls it through. It's
interesting. So, I mean, when you think about that, I've worked in commercial, years past, and it's very detailed, right? Even when we do our as-built drawings at the end, I did fire alarm and low voltage and electrical, and so it's very specific. The architect's very detailed on where the outlets are, right? Fire alarms, especially in a school where you'd work or a government facility. Same thing for you. I mean, I'd imagine there has to be a lot of coordination now. Although you're doing the shop drawings and design and you're sending out for stamp, well, as far as MP&E, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, you're going to have to make sure you're coordinated and understand where vents are going, duct work, plumbing, electrical, and this has to be measured, laid out, precise, so then that way there's no mistakes as you're working with real timbers and logs.
Yep, it's absolutely true. And we'll find that there's almost always some frame sections in the closets or something where we try to utilize those areas. But in the logs, it has to be done. Drawings have to be done. They have to be taken to the mechanical engineer and to whoever's doing it, and have him approve it, and then we cut him and do it. While we're on site, we will cut. We just don't want the contractor to have to do it. But while we're on site, we will field cut some of that stuff in.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine there's probably some stuff in the field, or maybe something was missed. I mean, it's a lot different than maybe my drywaller that covers some of my can lights or, my outlets. I mean, this is a little bit different. You're going to be very precise. You know where it's at, and then we just make sure and check. That way, when you're off-site, you're not worrying about anyone trying to come in and patch or cut or core, into the exterior walls.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah. So, what's upcoming and exciting for you, David and the team at Caribou Creek?
Well, are you talking about exciting projects coming up?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have some really exciting projects going up. We're working on, I don't know, I'd hate to call it a compound, but it sort of is. We're working with a big family we're going to be putting 4 or 5 different homes on the project, a big lodge, and it's close by. We're finishing a really nice project on a lake, and we have the helicopter, the pavilion, and some of that stuff down in there. And they're great people to work for. It's just a lot of fun. We also have a possibility of doing another job in Chile, in the Patagonia. And because I like to fish, I want to sell that one. I'm going to go down there and help put that one in myself.
That's amazing. So, I mean, you mentioned this New Zealand, but, I mean, to head down to Chile, that's a little commute, down to the Patagonia out there.
Yeah. It is, but we've shipped some other stuff down there a couple times, and right now I could ship a container to all the way down south of Santiago into Chile for less money than I can ship one to New York.
Wow. It's amazing. So the freight's different. So when you are, heading down Chile, you're just going to ship a container and by boat, I'd imagine, right down the coastline and on down. Yeah. As long as you can get through the ports with COVID restrictions and delays at the port, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can actually ship right out of Lewiston, Idaho, if we want to. We don't usually, but we can, and it goes out the Columbia River and all the way down to Chile.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I just enjoy speaking to you, David. Just understand more about the the log home and timber business. I mean, it's something very different than what I'm doing, but the complexity. I think just offhand, people will look at a picture and say that's an amazing log home, right? And they don't understand just the complexity, the coordination, the systems that have been developed, that you've been working on the last 30-plus years. It's just an incredible operation. So for those listening, to follow you and see some of these amazing projects, the compound, the possible job down in Chile, where can they find you?
CaribouCreek.com. Caribou is Caribou. But, yep.
And same thing
That's
for
where
your
we're at.
and same thing for your Instagram, which we'll have tagged here in the show notes for anyone listening, so they can give you a follow. And David, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit insight into the log home business and a little bit about your operation.
Sure. Good to talk to you.